It's a beautiful day today. Let's go outside and have some fun. You know, maybe make some content outside. See how that... Oh, Ben's calling.
Yo, what's up, man? I'm out in Portland. I don't know if you remember it or not, but I need you to handle the workflow Wednesday this week. Maybe do it on Lightroom basics. Maybe you can take some of those photos we shot the other day of the tri-tip and the steak and all that, and show people how to make those pretty. Could be cool. Could be cool. Maybe. Best of luck.
All right, looks like we're going upstairs. So today, I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of photo editing and show you how things are adjusted in Lightroom. Now, again, if you learn it in Lightroom, you could take those basic skill sets to other programs. It doesn't necessarily have to be Lightroom. So what you learn today is universal through any kind of app that you use, either on your phone or on your computer. Exposure is exposure, hues are hues, tones are tones, curves are curves. A lot of times there are subtle differences between the programs, but again, if you learn the basics, you'll understand that through any program that you use. So let's get started. Alright, so let's go through the basics here. Let's open up Lightroom. There we go, right here. Pops open. It's Classic CC. It's the new Adobe Creative Cloud. Oh, look at that. And so we've got a photo already. So let's look at all of our imported photos. Let's go back to the library. Let's open up. So now, as you can see, Lightroom has a catalog system that's really actually intuitive. I like it a lot. So let's look at all these photos we took. We took a bunch of these photos. A lot of them are okay. But we can find one that really pops and stands out, which I did like that one. I wonder if I should do that one. Let's do that one. Might as well. I've started 5 stars anyway because it looks really cool. All right, so let's do this. So let's go in and talk about the basics of Lightroom. Now, all we have to do is double click, pops open, right? Now move over to the developer tab, or the develop tab, I'm sorry, right here. If we hit develop, we go into the develop mode, right? And it switches modes over, and now you have on the right side all these new tools. All right, so let's go through the basics here. So your histogram right up here in the right corner is basically going to tell you where all of your colors lie within the spectrum. Now, right now we don't have anything that's too dark, and we don't have anything that's too light. As you can see, this side on the left side here of the histogram is dark for all the blacks. And it basically goes up from blacks to shadows to exposure to highlights and then to the whites. Now, you can adjust each one of these sort of sections individually down below, and we'll get into that. But right now, it looks like there's nothing really peaking, meaning there's not a big spike here on the left side showing that there's everything that's really, really dark and underexposed, and there's nothing really in the right side that has a spike up that to show that it's basically really, really overexposed, which is good. Okay, so now let's get rid of our little indicator right here. This is the file size and what I shot it at. So it was at 1/256th of a second at 3.6 ISO 400, and this was with the XH1 using the 35mm 1.4. All right, so let's change that down to, let's close that out, loop info, show overlay, so we don't need that anymore. Now we can just see this. Great. Okay, so now we understand the histogram. We'll leave that open right now so we can kind of see how our adjustments take effect. So let's open up into, right now, basic. All right, so in basic, you've got your basic elements here, right? White balance is extremely important. Now, what white balance is there's different color temperatures of light that is created. A incandescent bulb creates a very warm light, while the sun creates a very cool light. And those are all measured in temperatures. So when you correctly white balance something, that means you're basically correcting the camera's sensor to capture the image in that native white color of the light that's coming in. So if you're outside, it's probably going to be 5600. If you're inside, it's probably going to be much lower. All right, so as you can see right now, as I move the slider around, you can see the different range of color that you can actually capture and the white balance. Now, what you can do is you can basically take this eyedropper and you can give it something that's supposed to be white. Like, for example, this highlight's probably white, right? So I can go as a starting point and just kind of click on it. and it changes the color. Now I can see it's a little bit green, it's a little bit blue, so all we have to do here, so this is the color temperature, but you can make additional adjustments using the tint. So if it's a little green right now, let's bring it just a little bit up. I don't know if you can see that change. Feels a little bit better, right? So definitely make that adjustment in your tint if you feel like it's too magenta or too green. And then with the temperature, we can probably go up just a little bit. It's a little too blue. I mean, we're taking pictures of food, so you don't necessarily want it too blue. You want that warm, tasty color. So we adjusted that there. Now, if we go down to the next section, which is exposure. Now, exposure is very simple. It's how much light was let in. So you can actually increase the amount of light that you've let in just by dragging this over. Now, obviously it makes the photo brighter. As you can see, you can kind of overexpose and you're like, too much. So what you could do is and you can also underexpose too by going the opposite way, by going negative. So you can really get a moody look, or you can get something that's very, bright and happy. Now, for this particular shot, it feels maybe like we should just slightly underexpose it, just so we can get some of those corners really dark and we can get that meat and that cherry tomato and that mushroom to really pop out, right? So let's just underexpose. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I'm going to overexpose it. And I'll show you why. I'm going to overexpose just a little bit. So then let's move down to contrast. Now, contrast basically just adds tonality to your image, right? So basically, as you increase contrast, what you're doing is you're taking the light color and the dark color and you're sort of pushing everything out to the sides, right? So if you can look at your histogram, as I increase contrast, everything from the middle sort of shifts left. Everything from the left side shifts left, and everything to the right side shifts right, which basically means you're pushing more of your darks into the dark range and more of your whites into the white range. Now that creates a contrast. So if you do the opposite, it pulls everything to the center. Can you see that? Can you see the histogram? So it pulls everything to the center, gives you less darks and less lights, so everything sort of feels muddy, right? And muted together. There's no pop, right? So typically you don't want to adjust contrast too much like this, but you do want to add a little bit of contrast because it gives you that range that we can then correct later on. So I'll show you where we can correct. Now the next section here is highlights. Highlights are great. Highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks. This is where you can really adjust individual sections of the overall photo. So like, for example, in exposure, if you increase the exposure, you're actually bringing everything up, which means if you are making it brighter, you actually make everything brighter. You make the darks brighter, you make the lights lighter, you make everything lighter. So in this section here, you can really fine-tune your image. So for example, if we wanted the highlights to be a little bit more poppy and we wanted them to be more white but not affect the rest of the image, all we have to do is just turn that highlight up, and you can kind of see it gives all of your whites just a little bit more brightness. Conversely, if you drag it to the left and give it a negative highlight, you can actually pull detail out of your highlights. So if you have something blown out, if you have highlights that are blown out, all you have to do is just drag that little slider down to the left, and it'll get more detail in those highlights that are blown out. Now, we don't have too many blown out highlights in this one, but I definitely like to see a little bit more detail in the high end, the light color. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn down the highlights a little bit. Shadows are the same thing. So if we go to the left, it makes the shadows darker. If we go to the right, it makes the shadows lighter. Now, if you have something that's underexposed and you want to just maybe pull out a little bit of detail in some place, you can do that. So for example, in this one, I'm going to pull the shadows to the right just a little bit so we can kind of get a little bit more detail on that mushroom, like the bottom section of the mushroom. Now, it's hard to tell, but it adds just enough of a contrast in there so that you can actually see a little bit of those details. All right, so whites and blacks do the same thing, except like, for example, if we look up here in the histogram again, what we were just adjusting was the highlights, which is this section here, and the shadows, which are just this section here. Now, if you wanted to go even more of an extreme, you can adjust the blacks or the whites, right? And that's the very high end of the very extremes of the histogram. I'm not going to necessarily play with it too much here because we don't really need it. We're not really pushing anything too far into either of the corners, so I'm not worried about it. So we'll leave those as is, but I'll give you an example of what you can do. So for example, again, increasing the whites overall increases everything so brightly, and you can see what happens with the histogram is it just shoves everything over to the right side. Boom, everything's overexposed. Right? So now if we go back over here, we can actually dial down some of the white color, which because there's not a lot, we're not really dialing down a lot. And same with the black color. So if you look, you can shove that all the way to the left, and you can see the histogram again going all the way spiking to the left, and that's showing you that you have a lot of really underexposed things. So if you bring that back towards the middle again, it kind of evens things out. That's about good, and I guess we could play a little bit with it, but for the most part, this image doesn't need it, but your image may need it. All right, tonal curve. Sorry, let's speed this up a little bit. Tonal curves. All right, so this is something that's really important and really powerful. Now, this essentially takes your levels that you see up here and it balances them out in a way that you can control in a curve structure rather than a point structure, right? So for example, if I want my blacks to not be so dark, I can just pull this side up and you can see what happens to the image, right? So all the dark image, the dark section of the photo actually gets brighter. Conversely, if you do the white up here and you bring that down, all your whites get much darker. Now, you don't necessarily want to use it with those 2 points. The power of the curve is that you can actually put points onto this linear line. So, if anybody's ever seen Instagram, and everybody probably has, all you have to do to make an Instagram look, that Instagrammy look, is bring your black level up just a little bit, bring your white level down just a little bit, and create something what is called an S-curve in here. And the S-curve was classically known as the wedding curve. And it made everything sort of pop really nicely, and it gave it a nice contrast and tone. So watch what happens here. So right now it's a linear line, kind of looks a little muddy and boring. What we're going to do is we're going to add a point right down here in about the low mid-tones of the dark, right? So we're going to bring that down a little bit. So we're going to make all those darker, right? So you're starting to get a little more contrast. You're starting to get a little bit more contrast between the whites and the darks, but you're also bringing the darks together, right? So if you also do the same up here, you're creating this S-curve. So now you start to pull that up. Now we get that really weird Instagram-y look that everybody loves, and that all you can do now is just go to Instagram and tap a button that says, whatever crazy names they have for the filters. But again, this is what the tonal curve does. You're allowed to fix little tiny sections of the curve and make it look really clean and nice. Now, I don't usually push my photos to that extreme where there's a lot of muddiness in the middle, so I kind of keep my curve pretty sane. It's not too extreme. You can go really extreme and you can see what happens, but you don't necessarily want to do that because now you're essentially over cranking your white colors and your dark colors. So okay, so nice little S-curve there. It's looking better. Now here's a great thing. So if you hit the backslash key, which is the key right below the delete, you can actually see what your image looked like before and after. Before and after. So you can kind of see where this image is going. Now you're starting to get a little bit more contrast, a little bit more pop in the middle. It's starting to look really good. All right, so now that we've done tonal curve, let's go down to color. Right now, color is HSL stands for hue, saturation, luminance. Now, you can now individually control the specific colors in your image. So, for example, say that tomato is too red. I don't like that tomato being that red. I want it a little bit more orange. This perfect example here is drag under hue in your reds, drag it more to orange, so you can see how it changes color now. See how that happens? It changes all the reds to a little bit more orange. Conversely, if you go the other way, it turns it more magenta, right? Nobody wants to eat that. That doesn't look delicious. So let's go turn to the right here. It's a little too red, so we'll pull back just a little bit to kind of match the rest of the tone of everything. Okay, so let's pop the green a little bit too. The green needs to be a little bit more green. Not too much green, but just a little bit more green. Kind of give it a little bit of that levels. There we go. All right, so that looks good. So again, in saturation, so that was hue. That's literally shifting the color to another color. Now saturation is sort of covering it's changing how much color is in the image, right? So for example, if you increase the saturation of the red, your reds get much more brighter, I guess is the right correct term for that. So like for example, if we drag over the reds, watch what happens to the tomato. The tomato, and actually some of the redness in the meat starts to pop out too. So if you go the other way, it actually pulls the color out. We don't want that because that's not appetizing. It looks dead. So we don't want that. So let's go back to the middle. We don't really want to adjust the saturation, particularly in this shot, because I actually like that red. Now the red's sort of working for me. So let's go down to green. Let's take the green down just a little bit. It's a little too poppy, meaning it looks a little fluorescent. So let's take the green down just a little bit. Take the yellows down just a little bit too. And then luminance. Luminance is basically brightness, right? So again, you can take a color like the red because it's so prominent. We can drag that all the way to the right and see what happens. It makes only that specific color brighter. You can do the exact opposite of taking it all the way down and making that specific color darker. Everything else is left alone except for that particular color. So now we can adjust it, maybe make it just a little bit brighter. So let's see. All right, so let's look again at the original, which I'm going to hit backslash. All right, so that's the original. That's the new. And yeah, it's kind of looking a lot more polished up. This kind of looks nice. A few more things we've got to go through here. Split toning. Split toning is essentially just, it's something that you don't always want to use, but it's changing the highlight color. So if you wanted to change the highlight color, so anything that's like bright here, we can change it to, let's just for an extreme say green, right? So we can change it to green, see what happens. All your whites turn really green, and you can obviously change using the eyedropper. You can change it to whatever you want, but typically that gives it a weird surreal look. It's not, I don't recommend it unless you're doing something very stylized. So something like this, I would say nothing. So we would just drag the saturation all the way down to 0 so that it doesn't actually affect anything in the photo. All right, so, and you could also likewise do the same thing with the shadows. So make everything very blue in the shadows. Or, if you want everything very red or green or whatever it is. If you're looking for that stylistic look, then definitely use it. But again, use it at your own discretion, however you want to feel to enhance your image. All right, so the last one I want to go over, don't worry about any of these others down here. We can deal with that later, but is detail. Now, detail actually, oh, you know what? I forgot something. I forgot clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. All right, so let's go back to clarity. Clarity is one of those things that is underused and understood. Understood? Is that even a word? Is misunderstood. Clarity creates contrast in the midtones. So what happens is your clarity allows you to keep your darks and your lights the same, but it increases contrast in your midtones. And what that basically means is when you drag the slider to the right, you're increasing just the contrast in the midtones so your darks and your lights don't change like in contrast. In contrast, your darks and your lights change, right? But in clarity, only your midtones change. Only your midtones get a little bit more crushed, which means you can increase the sort of the contrast in between the way it shifts through your midtones. Now, if you have a picture of a person, you actually might want to turn the clarity down a little bit, because in portraits, you want a little bit of that softness to happen within faces and skin tones. So some people prefer that. Some people like that little bit of that airbrushy kind of feel. That's what will get you some of that nice, clean smoothness to happen. So if you turn clarity down on people, it gives you that smooth look. If you turn it up in food or in any other like high detail, high contrast shot, you're gonna get more what looks more crispier, and that's a way to add sharpness without actually adding sharpness. All right, so let's go back. We talked about clarity. Dehaze is a new one. It basically just takes out that overall haze. Now we don't have any of that in the shot, but it takes out haze like if you have a shot outside and there's a little bit of haze either because of distance or because of atmosphere, which is like fog and that kind of stuff, and you just want to take it out or add a little bit, you can do that. But again, this is a food shot, so it doesn't really work. All right, so, and then vibrance and saturation, again, this is overall adjustments, right? So we had already seen adjustments. Because I skipped it, I apologize. We'd already seen how we can adjust individual saturation luminance here. These are overall global sliders. So as you increase, the vibrance, it increases the vibrance of the entire image. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It depends on, again, what your image is. Again, saturation, I prefer to do it individually, because if you do something that's an overall sort of shotgun approach there, it doesn't necessarily give you that look that you want. All right, so that looks good. That looks good. And now I feel like maybe just let's do a little bit of cleanup. Now, there's a couple tools up here. Let's close all these tools so that you can now get a good feel for it. So let's go back in. Let's say I want to adjust just the final crop. So I like how this looks. Let's now crop in. So again, we can just crop in maybe just a little bit. Maybe we can adjust. I don't know if I like the curve. So we can adjust the curve, how it's entering the frame. Sure, why not? That actually looks a little better. So let's hit the backslash so we can see what the original looks like. Oh, it's actually not going to show me the original crop. That's fine. I kind of like this. It's kind of centered. It's almost centered. Maybe we should center it just a little bit. And you can use restraints. You can use aspect ratios here, and you can change the angle and stuff too, just through these drop-down menus. But again, I like to do it freehand. So that's about right. I mean, we're almost getting in the center, but I'm okay with this one. All right, so that doesn't look too bad. I like that. So now the next couple things, like for example, if you wanted to get rid of some spot removal, basically some little dots that you have, like for example, these little things bug me. So I'm just going to go in and click on them like this, and Lightroom does a really good job of just making the adjustments for you and taking those little dots out. You can also drag it too. That's the other thing. You can, if you don't like a section, you can just drag the section and it'll replace the section, but I don't need to worry about that, so we're going to delete that. You can probably do a little bit of the meat here too, just to kind of, oh, that didn't work very well. Let's try that again. Let's do something down here. There we go. So you can also adjust it too. So if you don't like where Lightroom decided to put it, like if it put it up here, and you can kind of see, I don't like that. Let's match meat to meat. Let's kind of put it somewhere down here. There we go. So now it gives it that nice, nice cleaner look. Like you can clean up a lot of little things. All right, so that's good. Don't need eye reduction or a red eye reduction. That's just, if you have people, you can hit people's eyes and you can do that. And then these two right here, this is a gradient, and you can basically just add a gradient in, click and drag, and that'll give you a gradient that you can then adjust. Again, for this particular one, I don't think we need a linear gradient like this, it's good for sunsets and that kind of stuff, so you can see the mass that it's affecting, and what's in red, well, it's being affected, what's not in red was not being affected. So this really works with sunsets and that kind of stuff, because you might have a very bright sky that you want to bring down so that you can kind of match the landscape with your with your sky. So that really helps. But again, this is a food shot. Don't necessarily need a linear gradient. Now, however, though, the next one over is a radial gradient, and the radial gradient here, which allows you to then expose, like for example, if you want to do some vignetting, you can do that. Very simple through this. Now this gives it a little bit more of a surreal look. I wouldn't push it too far, but again, it's kind of a nice fix. So you can then adjust everything that you want in that gradient. Again, just like the basics tab, you've got it here. You've got everything from sharpness to clarity to everything. So everything that's inside, or as I'll show you, if you drag your hand over onto the little center here, it shows you the masks. So everything in red is affected, everything not in red is not affected. So So there's a nice gradient there that happens. Now you can also inverse the mask as well by just hitting inverse. It kind of reverses it so you can darken everything in the middle. You obviously don't want that. Or you can brighten everything in the middle. Again, you don't want that. But it allows you to sort of get a nice localized overall adjustment if you need to make something like that. So I kind of liked let's go back to this where it's a little bit darker on the outsides. Kind of like that. It gives it a nice little focus, brings your attention to the center. And yeah, so you hit return and you've got it. So this is our image. So again, if I hit backslash, we can kind of see where it came from. The image was okay. We had a good starting point. But this is kind of a very crispy, Instagram-y sort of look that you can get. Now, that's just using the basics. You can go a lot farther into stuff, but again, this was just about the basics of Lightroom, and yeah, so... Alright, so that was the basics of Lightroom. It's pretty simple, and it's very powerful, so whatever images that you take, that if they don't look exactly like you did, that in your head, on your camera, or in your computer, you can go back in and really fine-tune those little things so you can make it that image that you really want. So again, have fun, use these powerful tools, and we'll see you next week.